All right, we are looking at document 9 on page 3. Learned helplessness is the next subject. So we're looking at some practical things here. And this document is supposed to be helping us think about emotional issues and concepts. So I just put a number of concepts together here that'll hopefully be useful to you. Learned helplessness is a very, very curious experience that we going to take a look at now. Experiments with animals illustrate that when an animal is subjected to abuse from which it is not capable of extricating itself, it can become helpless. In other words, you put an animal in a situation they can't get out, they become helpless. Even when the constraints are removed, the animal continues to act helpless. The conditions of abuse have been removed, but the helpless behavior continues. Now, can you extrapolate that into people's lives? Even when the constraints are removed, the helpless behavior continues. For example, and this is something that was actually done, a dog was given an electrical shock while being harnessed in a cage in a way that prevents the dog from removing itself from the shock. So here's what they did. They made this, let's see, there's some chalk here somewhere. This will look like the bottom of the cage, okay? At the bottom of the cage, the dog, it was divided in two parts. This part had an electrical grid. This part did not. There was a light bulb up here, okay? Light bulb up here. And they would turn on the light bulb, and then they would put electrical shock in the floor. And the dog would get shocked, and so the dog would jump over here, okay? So the dog knew it was coming because the light bulb came on and quickly made that association. So when the harness is taken off, the dog still allows itself to be shocked, even though it now could move away from the shock. Why? Because the animal has begun thinking in terms of being helpless. Here's what they did. They kept on doing this, and the dog kept jumping over here. Then they put a harness on the dog and anchored it to the floor right here. Then they turned on the light and turned on the electricity. And the dog tried to jump, but what? Couldn't get away. And they did this over and over again, and after a while, the dog just thinks it can't get away. Then they take the harness off, and they turn the light on and turn the shock on, and what does the dog do? Stays right there. Why? Why? Is the dog helpless? No. The dog is not helpless. Then why does the dog stay there? Why does the dog not jump over here? What's the title of this little section? Learned helplessness. Yeah. The dog has learned to be helpless. Okay? Is the dog helpless? No. Why has the dog learned to be helpless? The dog was helpless for a while, okay? Because the dog was harnessed to the floor, could not get away. Took the harness off, the dog still behaves helpless. Can people learn to be helpless? They can. If subjected to abuse, when unable to leave the situation, they may refuse to leave the abuse even when they would be able to leave. This creates a very destructive pattern of self-abuse or allowing others to abuse. You see what can happen here? You get somebody in a situation where they cannot escape abuse and they just can't get away, and sometimes they cannot get away, but you take them out of that situation or you take them away from that, and what do? They will still, many times, still act helpless. Can this be helped? In the case of the animal, a person had to physically remove the now unharnessed animal from the shock. What they would literally do was turn on the light, turn on the electricity, and drag this mutt over here, okay? Sorry for the language, but, take this helpless dog and put him over here, okay? Then put him back here again, turn on the light again, turn on the electricity, drag the dog over here again. And after they did that for a while, did the dog learn not to be helpless? Yes. The dog now figured out, oh, I don't have to put up with this. But could the dog have figured this out on his or her own? Apparently not, okay? So, how can this be helped? In the case of the animal, a person had to physically remove the now unharnessed animal from the shock. This told the animal that it's possible to leave the painful situation. After several assists, the animal could remove itself from the shock. With humans, the same principles often apply. They need help to remove themselves from the abusive situation. They need to be told and shown that they are no longer helpless and can indeed remove themselves from abusive situations and respond in a mature manner. So, have you seen people in this kind of a situation? Don't put up your hand, but have you ever been in a situation like this? Are you now in a situation like this? I work with many people who are in these kinds of situations. They're concluding that they can't do anything about this. And sometimes they can't. But many times we have to help them. I mean, literally, and I don't mean necessarily physically, but we have to help them literally see, now, wait a minute, you're in this situation. You don't have to put up with this. You can get out of this. But if they've been in it so long, or maybe not even so long, but in such an intense way that it's impacted them and they think this is normal, it's very difficult for them to learn they don't have to do this. Okay. And so what God does is brings people like you into their lives, and you show them, you say, wait a minute, you don't have to do this. Wait a minute, God doesn't really want you putting up with this abuse. You don't have to. And so we show them how to get out. And so eventually, hopefully, they will see that they can do this. And many times in the process, they don't trust themselves, okay? This is just what I bumped into with the example I just gave you at the beginning of class here. This person did not trust himself, and so, you tell them, here's what you need to do, but they're concerned and worried that maybe if they do that, they're going to interrupt something that's been part of their lives for so long, and they can hardly imagine being living in a different way. So many times, it takes many, many times of taking this person and taking them out of that painful situation over and over and over again, so that after a while they realize, oh yeah, I can do this. Yeah, this is possible, okay? So I could say much more about it, but let's see what comments or questions you have about that. Very fascinating concept. Fascinating concept? Okay, yeah. Is it true of people? Can it be true of people? Can be. All right, moving on to the next subject, maintaining images. Rather than seeing the truth, people ignore warning signs of dysfunction in others. Then they find themselves in the same difficult situations over and over and over again. They do not require others to be responsible for their actions and attitudes. They feel responsible for other people's feelings. Idealized feelings of home and the subsequent loss of home can create idealized images of home. It's not so strange to realize that childhood memories are just that, they're memories. Perhaps, though, if innocence is compromised, home becomes idealized rather than stored in memory as fond recollections. Healthy childhood memories can be stepping stones left behind and built upon for development and maturity. Images distort reality. There's quite a few words in there, aren't there? Maybe we should look at that a little bit. Many times, and if you go back to document 4, which we looked at last term and we looked at this term, people need to get out of problems, need to tell the truth, okay? Let me make a little brief introduction to this class here. Just a little parenthetic statement. This class, 4th term, is more difficult than 3rd term, okay? Why? Because we're trying to get the concepts into our minds. We're trying to get the concepts into you, ready to move into other people's lives. So it takes a little more concentration. In 3rd term, we're talking mostly about you, and it's sort of like I'm presenting things to you, and it's about you. Now I'm presenting things to you that I want you to use for other people, okay? And that takes another step. It takes another step, and it's a little more complicated. So let's take a look at this. It really comes out of document 4, which was emotional injury, wounds, and scars. Remember that one? Looked at it several times. When we face the difficulties, we need to tell the truth. What did John 8:32 say? Okay, know the truth, and the truth will set you free. And we sometimes don't want to see the truth. And so sometimes we go about dealing with situations, instead of telling the truth, what we do is go into defensive mechanisms, right? We use denial, we use anger, we use manipulation, and so on and so on, projection. Or we can not, we don't always go mechanisms. Sometimes we go idealizations, where we create this ideal situation and we think that's us, or that's our home, or that's the church, or that's, we make it ideal rather than telling the truth. And so when we maintain images, we're not telling the truth. So let's start again with this. Rather than seeing the truth, people ignore warning signs of dysfunction in others. And we've just seen it in a ministry that has impacted thousands and thousands of lives. We talked about it this week, and we heard it last evening again. People saw warning signs. There were warning signs of dysfunction in that organization. Did people do something about it? No. They had this idealized image of these red notebooks and all the perfect truths that were coming out of all those seminars, okay? The warning signs were there. Did people pay attention? Very few people did. The few people who did got shut down and quieted, and the rest of the people maintained the image, okay? Now, after how many years, the image is falling apart. So let's be careful that we don't ignore warning signs of dysfunction in other people and just continue on making an idealized image. Okay, still with me? Okay, got to hang on to some of these concepts, all right? So they find themselves in the same difficult situations over and over again. They do not require others to be responsible for their actions and attitudes, and they feel responsible for the other's feelings. And sometimes you talk to somebody about something like this, and what will happen is they'll start defending the person causing the problem. Why? Because they're trying to maintain the image that everything's fine. Idealized feelings of home and the subsequent loss of home can create idealized images of home. So if I have the idealized image that my home was this perfect place, and then the subsequent loss of that, and then when it doesn't work out that way, I still maintain the image. And I tell everybody how wonderful my home was, when really there were lots of struggles. It's not true for everyone, but when there are struggles, we need to at least deal with them. It's not so strange to realize that childhood memories are memories. Okay? They are memories. And memories are not always exactly correct. But if innocence is compromised, in other words, if home was a place where your innocence was compromised, a place where you were hurt, a place where people were thinking incorrectly, there was sin, there were real problems, that's compromising your innocence. And the result is that your home can be stored in your memory as an idealized place without paying attention to the truth that there were some real problems. Okay? Now, it's okay to remember the good times too. We're not trying to paint the whole picture as black. There were good times, and we need to keep these things in balance. Okay? Healthy childhood memories can be stepping stones left behind and built upon for development and maturity. The images will distort reality. So try to sort out. When you're working with someone, try to sort out the images and the actual events, and try and help them see the positive side of the actual events, but not maintain images that don't recognize the problems. Okay? When we do that, we're going to run into problems somewhere along the way. Idealized images are difficult to erase. They serve functional purposes of maintenance. They can be adjusted as needed since they may not be totally accurate. They also serve as a point of reference or anchor or security or place to hide in times of stress. So you got somebody who's living with images, very difficult to get rid of them. And we want to be really careful what we don't just destroy those images right away. We want them to slowly see the image and slowly see it for what it is. Okay? And sometimes I think about it this way. If you think about a person who's really, really struggling, and maybe they've got one prop holding them up, okay? You can get to this place. And that prop might be an image, and you discover that it's an image. Are you going to kick that prop out? No. Why? That might be the last prop that's holding them up. Okay? Does this make some kind of sense? They're really struggling. They've got problems, but they're holding themselves up with one prop of one image. Get into the life, build strength in the life so they have more stability underneath of them before you start chipping away at the images. Okay? You start chipping away at the images, which looks like the right thing to do, you're liable to lose the person. So we don't want to destroy them by eliminating the thing that's actually holding them up in a very difficult time. Some of these things get a little complicated, don't they? A little bit complicated. Okay. But hopefully we can learn them. So in some situations, people grow up in a system made up of idealized images where the task was image maintenance at all costs. I've talked with people who say, oh, breakfast was a nightmare. On the way to church, things were terrible. But as soon as we got out of the car in the parking lot, we all smiled. Okay? We all walked into church like everything was fine. So people grow up in a system of an image where maintaining that image was what had to happen. And as a teacher and principal of a Mennonite school, what I saw was students coming to school with a great deal of tension, great deal of stress. And I imagined that what happened at home was, oh, you got to get the children out of bed, you got to get breakfast, you got to pack lunch, you got to get all the books, you got to finally get them in the van and get them off to school, right? And they finally walk into the school and there's like, you feel this big collective sigh of relief from the students. And so part of my goal was not just to meet the academic needs of the student, but to meet the social and emotional need too, which meant the teachers had to be prepared. The teachers had to be prepared. The school had to be prepared to make this school a safe place. And the same thing is true. I've tried to do everywhere I go to make the school a safe place. At this school, is this a safe place? I trust that it is a safe place. If it is, then we can start meeting the needs of people, not just academically, and not even primarily academically. Things I expect you to remember from this class. But more than that, we need to provide an atmosphere where healing can happen, okay? And where you can start examining your lives, you can start examining the church, the home, the society, and so on. And in there, detect the images and detect the true. And so we can promote what was true. We can go into the future with what's correct, not maintaining images that then we're going to try and protect at all costs. Okay, in some situations, people grow up in a system made up of idealized images where the task was image maintenance at all costs. This sets a pattern of surface relationships that may serve some persons well, but haunt others who think in more introspective terms. So it may serve some people very well because they are the ones who are creating the image they want perpetuated, but for people, the children in the situation or some people in the situation who tend to think more deeply, they're going to say, something's wrong. They know intuitively something's wrong. And it takes a long time to sort out what's wrong. Also complicating the process in image maintenance is contamination of the child's or the spouse's emotions. Since image maintenance is a critical task, it's important that someone who's powerful control the thoughts of the others in the system. The result is that the controlled persons lose contact with their own thoughts and emotions. When they have a thought or emotion, they're not even sure if it's theirs or someone else's. And indeed, these people have become trapped in learned helplessness. They've been harnessed to the floor. They're shocked. They don't think they can do anything about it because of the system that's keeping them there. The unfortunate result is they may never develop into their own person. So we want to be really, really careful about image maintenance in our own lives. In my own life, it was important for me to tell the truth about my family. My father was very, very strong in some ways. He made me who I am in some ways. He tolerated absolutely no disobedience. Any disobedience was met by immediate discipline, harsh. Well, it was a little too harsh sometimes, but it did teach me you don't do things that are wrong. Okay. On the other hand, my father had some serious weaknesses that if I'm not willing to recognize, I'm going to perpetuate those weaknesses. You see, I don't want to do that. I want to perpetuate where he has done well, where he's taught me well, where he's taught me right. I want to perpetuate that. I want to teach that. I want to adopt that. I want to take that into my next generation. And where he was weak, I'm going to have to find another role model. There are other role models out there. And God provided a role model for me and my grandfather. And my grandfather taught me how to manage money, taught me how to work, taught me how to fix things, and so on and so on. And so God does provide places for you to learn. He really does. You might have to go looking, might take a while to figure it out, but God does provide. It's just that we want to make sure that we are not allowing ourselves to be contaminated with the image maintenance so that we're perpetuating something that does not work. Let's be really careful. Okay, church systems can be similar. There can be a dominant leader who controls the thought processes in spite of popular comments about spiritual gifts. I mean, you might say, well, he's a prophet or he's a mercy person or she's this or that. All persons are expected to walk in lockstep. Anybody who cannot or will not do so will be ostracized. And once again, this ministry that has come into question and is all over the news these days, the religious news, is exactly that. This powerful leader required everybody to walk in lockstep. You know what lockstep means? They take a step and the people behind them fall right in their footsteps. Step, 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 step. That's what's called lockstep. In other words, they do something and the people following them have to do exactly the same thing. Got to be really careful when that happens, because if they don't have someone to whom to be accountable, if there's not a multiplicity of leaders, the Bible says in the multitude of counselors there's safety. And there were people in that ministry who were challenging the ministry. There were some popular leaders who were still leaders, and when those people challenged the ministry got rid of them. They were eliminated from the process. So you see what can happen when you get somebody who's so powerful, forcing people to walk in lockstep, not being accountable to anyone else, and then anybody who won't follow them is completely put off the page. So let me just introduce another concept here before we read the last paragraph. But that is when I hear about a group that says, well, we have accountability, I usually ask, well, what is your accountability and to whom are you being accountable? And you know what these ministries will do too many times, and you know, the Christianity is full of these kinds of things, popular ministries that are all over the country. They will get people to be accountable to whom they know will not challenge them. So if I want to make sure that what I do is not challenged, I'll pick out people I know who are going to support me and be loyal to me and not hold me accountable, and they're going to listen to me. So the accountability people are going to listen to me instead of me listening to them. This happens over and over and over again, okay? So be careful in those situations. All right, the last paragraph. The strong persons who are controllers are characterized by insecurity. And this, you would never guess this is true. You get somebody who goes up front, controls the whole audience with a smile on his face, everything's fine, we've got everything under control. But you discover later on this person was very insecure, and the only way to maintain control was to mesmerize other people. Strong leaders or controllers are typically characterized by insecurity. Their situation is pitiable, but not very easily remedied. It's usually my suggestion to leave the proximity if possible until personal internal strength can be developed in a safe environment, free from contamination, and filled with support and affirmation. In other words, you get a situation where a person is in a controlling environment. If you can, get them out of it and put them someplace where they can get healed, healthy, strong, so that if they have to go back, they're going back as a strong person. Okay? We're trying to build strength into them and get them out of the situation where they're constantly bombarded with the propaganda of a particular system or a control over a situation where they're told they don't amount to anything, they never will amount to anything, you've got to listen to me or everything's going to fall apart. You've got to get those people out of that situation, build strength into them, and as long as they're under that control, probably they're not going to be listening to you. If you can get them out of there, get them into a safe environment, teach them, so when they go back, they can go back stronger. So it's usually my suggestion to leave the proximity, if possible, until the personal internal strength can be developed in a safe environment, free from contamination, and filled with support and affirmation. Support the people, affirm them, help them understand who God's made them to be. Reading books or understanding the symptoms and developing emotional and spiritual strength is very helpful. There's so many good books out there that can be so very useful to you. It's hard to recommend books because there's got to be something in almost every book that could cause problems. But read, get the truth, leave the stuff there that's not good. And there's just so many ways in which you can get help in many of these situations. Okay, questions or comments? Yeah, so one of the questions that always comes up here is what about people who idealize the situation, maybe home, maybe church, maybe a marriage, maybe parents, okay? It could be almost anything, maybe a job. You can idealize anything. How do we help somebody who idealizes something that should not be idealized? They're idealizing something, they're creating an image about something when the truth is they're actually being hurt in the process. Once again, it might be their only prop, so be careful with that one. Try to provide, well, let me back up and say, if I get into a situation like that, what I try and do is find the strongest, legitimate, foundational prop under them somewhere. Okay, knowing that there's a bad one over here that you shouldn't have, see if I can find another one someplace in their life. It might be their job, it might be their church attendance, it might be their wife, it might be one of the children. Find something that's really strong and make that stronger. Okay? Find something that's really strong and make that stronger and give them more of a sense of stability so that in time, then you can start pointing out that this other prop over here isn't working so well. Okay? So they can start contrasting the real truth with what they're claiming to be truth. Okay, let's take a look at the last part of our document 9 here. Contamination, children need discipline. That's what makes them disciples. You're a disciple if you are being disciplined. Of parents and of God and His Word, as children grow up, they must transition from blind obedience to thoughtfulness and discernment in life. When children are little, they've got to do it because you said so. No question. Got to do that. But as they get older, they need to transition into being able to process and do things. They need time and space to develop into their own person, and this is called differentiation. In other words, you're not your mom, you're not your dad, you're not your big brother, you're not your big sister, okay? You're not grandpa. You're your own unique person. It's called differentiation. We don't think of that when we're little because we're kind of disciples of our parents. That's what we're supposed to be. But after a while, you become your own individual. They learn they're their own person, and this is a critical transition. If this transition is not made, the person grows up to be unsure of his or her thoughts and emotions. They doubt themselves. They do not trust their own thoughts. We've got to make that differentiation as they grow up. And right back to my bicycle illustration, you're helping somebody ride a bike. They cannot ride that bike unless you've got a hold of the seat. They will fall. But after a while, they differentiate. They're not only going to be able to function when you're holding on to the seat, but now you can hop on your bike and ride along beside them on their bike, okay? So they become their own person. And that doesn't mean they're not disciplined. It doesn't mean they're not discipled, but it means that they now can trust themselves to ride the bike, to negotiate the turns, to make sure they don't run over the dog and all that kind of stuff that's out there. Emotions can be shut down. Feelings can be deadened. Thoughts can be doubted. Longings can be quieted. People do not trust their own experiences. Since they've not been allowed to think for themselves, they cannot think for themselves. Their adult life has become contaminated by external and controlling factors. In a parent-adult-child type of understanding, which we've talked about before, the adult becomes contaminated by negative elements from the parent and the child. It is important to keep the adult strong and healthy so meaningful communication and relationships can be developed and maintained. So let's take a look at this a little bit. So if we go back to the PAC model, and so we have parent and the adult and the child, what we're trying to do is develop a very healthy adult. And if the adult is not developed in a healthy way, then there are some negatives. Remember, the adult was all positive. Is that right? The parent had some positives and some negatives. The child has positives and negatives. So what can happen is, if we're not careful, we can have some of these negatives from the parent contaminate the adult, we can have some of the negatives from the child contaminate the adult. And what we've done is now we've not raised a healthy adult. And we've got an adult who's been contaminated. And now what we're trying to do is get back into this adult and help them to be a healthier person. So it's important to keep the adult strong and healthy so meaningful communication and relationships can be developed and maintained. We always want to be able to come back to that healthy adult and ask them to function out of that. So what to do? Help the person see the situation for what it is. They may already know that something does not feel right. Almost always people have a sense, intuitive sense, don't know what it is, but something just isn't right here, okay? And so our need is to be able to get in there, that person's life, and help them understand what it is. Provide a safe place for them and protect that place. I remember a family where many years ago, working with a family, and the man was doing some really bad things, and the wife finally left with the children and found another church and went there, and things seemed to be going well for her and for the children. And what do you think the husband did? He started going to that church too. Okay? So she found a safe place, which then became contaminated by the troubled husband. Okay? And nobody had the wisdom to see what was going on. He would literally go into the church service and sit down beside the family, after they had longingly and eventually provided a safe place for themselves. So when you do that, you find a safe place and then you protect that place. Don't let somebody contaminate that place. If they do, it's not safe anymore. Find safe people with whom they can associate. Try to prevent them from going to extremes in self-protection. We tend to go to extremes. People want to protect themselves. They'll start doing drastic things, doing things without enough logic and enough perception, enough discernment. Try and prevent that from happening. Relocate them away from the contaminating forces for a period of time. You may have to take a child out of a family. This is happening all the time. And make sure they're getting into a place where it is safe, not another unsafe place. They can find their identity away from controlling forces. When the forces aren't there that are constantly bringing negative into the adult, if we can eliminate those forces, if we can make sure we get rid of them, okay, we can protect the adult and make the adult stronger when we prevent the contaminations from getting in there. They can become strong under safe, strong mentoring. They can discover their own thoughts, emotions, beliefs, and behaviors. They can become healed, healthy, and strong. They can learn discipline and management in their lives. And many times people just struggle and struggle and struggle. Discipline. How can I bring discipline into my life? They've been told what to do so long. They've been hurt so many times. And now they just struggle to learn a little bit of discipline. Sometimes I'll tell people, okay, let's structure 1 hour of your day. If you try and structure their whole day, they'll just fall over, okay? Let's structure 1 hour of your day. What time do you have to get up? You're going to go for a run for 15 minutes. You're going to come back and get dressed for the day. For the next 15 minutes, you're going to take 15 minutes to read the Bible, 15 minutes to eat breakfast, okay? We've scheduled 1 hour of their day. Can they do that? Or maybe schedule one area of their life, maybe the financial part. We can't fix their whole life, but let's see if we can schedule part of their life. So they have a job, they get a paycheck, we get them a book in which they write down the paycheck, how much they paid for gas, how much they paid for coffee, how much the electric bill. Okay, so we're just trying, and people do this. Many people who are very strong and organized will do this without even, it's just the way they live. But many people have no idea that you can live that way. So what we're doing is trying to structure and discipline just a section of their life. They can learn to take charge of conversations and relationships in a gentle way. Many people, in every conversation, they become the receiver. They become the one who's acted upon. And we have to help them understand, no, you have thoughts you can present, and allow them, show them how to do this. You get into some really critical and difficult situations. I remember a situation where a man, he was good at his trade, but he was losing money. People would not pay him. They knew he wouldn't collect. And so what we did was set up a situation where we had a mock situation where he was the person he was, but then a couple of us were like, well, we're the people who owe him money, okay? So we'd sit him down, I mean, literally, in a room across the table, and have him give him a script and say, no, you must pay the bill. He was unable to say those words, okay? And then we would say, well, and I was not personally involved in this one, in actually, but the people we were working with would say, well, but I just don't think I need to pay you. And then we'd have to have him read the script. Yes, but don't you realize I did a job for you and you owe me this money? He couldn't do that, okay? So we're just trying to get people to do the obvious things sometimes. And learn to take charge of conversations and relationships in a gentle but a firm way. Develop boundaries for themselves and others. Many people do not have boundaries, okay? Or the boundaries are being violated. And we need to be the person who's willing to step in there and make sure the boundaries are there. Learn to provide windows of light to look forward to, give themselves hope. And, I talk to people about this many, many times. Well, what are you going to do in a week? What are you going to do in a month? What about a year from now? What are you going to be doing? Well, they don't know. I said, well, let's make a plan. You're at Bible school now. Let's go register you for Bible school next year. Why? Because I need you to have something to look forward to. I need to put a window in your life that even though it's out there a whole year away, it's still a window, okay? Or you're going to make plans to go into a ministry. You're going to go into VS someplace. And we'll make some of these plans for 6 months from now. And they'll say, well, that's too far away. No, it's not. If you put a date on it, it will happen, okay? And what we're doing is giving you a window to look forward to. So you're not at your job realizing that for the next 29 years, you're going to be sitting at this computer or, doing whatever you're doing. But we're putting some little windows in there to work toward. Completely change somebody's life, okay? Or maybe a visit with someplace, or maybe a trip to visit the grandparents or something of that sort. Learn to put windows of light to look forward to and give themselves hope. And you probably have to do it for them initially, but eventually they're going to have to learn to do it for themselves. They begin to trust themselves. They eliminate negative self-assessments. I'm not worth anything. I'm a nobody. Nobody cares. I'll never succeed, and so on and so on. They become safe, strong, healthy people, and they become strong enough to provide healing for other people. And as they see that happening in their lives, as they become strong enough to provide healing for other people, what they discover is that people start coming to them, okay? When they start having good opinions, they start verbalizing what they're feeling in their heart, they start seeing the positive, they do have some windows of hope they're looking forward to, all of a sudden, people start coming to them. And they really start seeing life take a turn, okay? They can return to their original environment and provide healing for other people there. Because they've been away, they've gotten stronger, they can go back. And then when the bad things start happening, when people start saying negative things to them, instead of being knocked flat, they stand there and say, I don't think this is quite right. And they're able to bring some truth into that environment. They need patience and self-confidence to not become recontaminated. You may have to support them. You get a situation where you're working with people or working with a family, and they're doing some cries for help, and you get in there and you stand with them, you work with them, and so on. And eventually, what we're doing is making them strong enough so that when contaminations come toward them, they can say, uh-oh, that doesn't belong here. Instead of just allowing that to come in there, we're rebuilding the boundaries and making the boundaries strong enough so that as contaminations come, they see them for what they are and don't get knocked flat. Okay, you should have a handout today called 9A, Factors to Consider When Attempting to Understand and Help People. So we're doing some practical things today. Christianity, is this person a Christian? Well, if they are, they should have a resource that other people don't have. If they're not, we probably ought to be talking with them about becoming a Christian. Gender, are they male or female? Women and men do things differently, think differently. We have to work with them differently. marriage. Is this person married or not married? We have to work with husband and wife, and if we can possibly, if they're married. If they're not married, then we have other issues to think about. So let's think about different parts of these people's lives so we can understand a little bit what they might be thinking about. Birth order, where do they come in the family? There are so many factors to consider. Just ask the questions. And just because somebody's firstborn doesn't mean they will always act in a certain way. It will impact them. Firstborns do have a particular way of operating in life. They can be the firstborn daughter. Firstborn son can still act like a firstborn, even though he might be the thirdborn. Okay, just because of the way he's treated in the family. So many times thirdborn people have struggles that the rest of people don't have, or maybe lastborns. Okay, we'll just talk a little bit about that. I don't spend a lot of time on birth order, but something we probably should think about. Firstborns are supposed to do everything, right? How many of you are firstborns? Oh dear, what are we going to do with all of us troublemakers? I'm one of them too, yep. Firstborns have to do everything, right? And of course, the younger children point out that probably there are more pictures of us than there are of all the rest of the people in the family, right? Especially if you're a later born, you say, where's my picture? If your family took pictures, then probably the firstborn was featured everywhere. So all kinds of things happen. The later born children many times have their own issues, especially lastborns, especially in a big family. Especially if they were girls and the last born is a boy. These little boys get pampered and taken care of really, really well. And they need really good wives if they ever get married because their sisters took so good care of them. And so, when you're talking to someone, ask these questions and find out, because they're having marriage struggles and the wife's having struggle with the husband, and you find out he was the last child in the family and he had sisters that babied him. Well, he's going to expect that the rest of his life, okay? So, you have to think about these kinds of things and help them understand that this could be impacting their lives, okay? Many times thirdborns struggle because the firstborn, got all the attention. The next born, pretty much. By the time you get to the thirdborn, it's like, oh, well, we know how to do this now and she'll be okay, right? And so, many times, someplace in the middle of the family, we get what's called a lost child, especially... I say, where'd you fit in the family? Well, I was the third or fourth. Okay, were you healthy growing up? Oh, yeah, I was fine. Did you learn well? Yeah, no problem. Did well in school. And see what I'm finding out? I'm finding out they didn't need a lot of attention, and they probably didn't get it. And so you get a person right in the middle of a family can become kind of lost. And many times, well, everything's fine, and the parents say, well, there was never a problem with this child. This child always did everything. She was healthy and he learned well and he made friends and so on and so on. And he was busy in the family taking care of whatever he wanted to do. And they just almost grew up by themselves. And those people many times have struggles later on in life, okay? So birth order can be very important. Spiritual gifts, is this person a prophet? Are they a mercy person? Do they have the gift of administration? They might. They might have the gift of administration. And you get a person who is a teacher in a school and a man, and maybe he has the gift of administration and he's struggling in his job because maybe the principal does not have the gift of administration. The principal might have been there 10 years or 20 years, might have the gift of mercy, and here you have a teacher who's been here 5 years with the gift of administration. Do you think there will be problems? There will be problems, okay? No doubt about it. And sometimes you have to tell that person, look, with the gifts God's given you, you should be an administrator someplace. That's the gift God's given you. There are probably people looking for somebody just like you. And so we think about where they are, the culture in which they're raised. Most of us have been raised in a Swiss culture. Not all of us. Some of us have been raised in more of a Dutch culture. And you try and get a marriage across those cultures, even a marriage that's, somebody from the South. My dad his family grew up in Virginia and West Virginia. My mother grew up in Pennsylvania, Dutch country, ganz Deutsch, and my dad didn't know how to talk Dutch, and it was a constant problem. And my dad wanted everything to be done you're supposed to say, please pass the potatoes. And, in my mother's family, it was, I want some potatoes, and my dad couldn't live with that, he was trained and taught that you do things politely and carefully, and you don't talk like that. And so there was this constant cultural tension. So we have to think about these things as we're working with people, because those things will provide difficulties. Temperament, people are sanguine, they're backslapping buddies with everybody. People are choleric, tend to be very strong, phlegmatic, a little bit slow, melancholy, a little bit like me. And so the temperament of the person is going to impact what you're going to get from them, and help them to understand that. Personality type A's. I'm sort of a type A, driving, multitasking, constant motion, tend to die young. Can't do that anymore. But, these people are always doing things, constantly going. The type B's, laid back, casual, it'll work out, it always does, that kind of thing. And you get a husband who's a type A and a wife who's a type B, or vice versa. Do you think there are going to be some struggles? There will be some struggles. Okay, so think about this. What about the age of the person? We're not seeing very many veterans anymore. There are a few around. Veterans, people came out of the Second World War era. They are practical, hard work, integrity, saving, responsible. I mean, this is how we do things, My grandpa had a whole stack of tires that were worn out, and I'm going to burn those tires. And Grandpa said, son, you're going to need those tires someday, He grew up in the Depression, They had a tire that had a break in it, and they stitched it with wire so they could keep on going, And my generation wanted to throw all that junk away. So you have to think about it. If you're working with somebody who's old and they just have this work ethic, you're not going to get them out of that right away. Okay? There's some good there. We have to think about it. Boomers, my age group would be the boomers. One of the early boomers, optimistic, loyalty, work hard, play, have heroes. Generation X tend to be skeptical, okay? Tend to be people who like to work, but they're also playful, like to have a good time. The millennials, which would be some of you folks, younger people, hopeful, fun, adventure, diverse. I mean, my sons have put a backpack on their back and gone to Asia, I was lucky to get to Ohio, So, a whole different world. You don't even think about, people can't even think in the same universe, So when you're talking about people who are struggling to get along with each other, or people trying to understand life, think about what's their age. Today, we have a whole other generation born after 2003, people who are fearful and detached. We don't even know what to call them. Some sociologists are calling them ferals, which means they're basically wild. No discipline, no order, no structure, just whatever, okay? And so you're talking to some of these young people. Even in Mennonite schools, we're starting to see reaction attachment disorders. These are the people, okay? How are we going to deal with that? It's a whole different world.